So our presentation is creating dynamic learning environments with the Zoom. Prior to the conference, I did send a link to a Padlet that will have all of the resources that Joanne and I co-created for this particular presentation and that we utilize with our students. So today's agenda, we're going to be talking about some session preparation, conducting the session and the use of tools in Zoom, energizing those online sessions, some other uses for Zoom, a little bit about Zoom fatigue, and then some time for questions. So when we think about using Zoom, we were rapidly shifting in the online or in the face-to-face environment to an online platform, right? So that emergency remote teaching impacted all of us with COVID-19. But as we worked within Zoom and worked with faculty members using Zoom, it was more the structural things that they were thinking about, like how to turn Zoom on, and less about how to actually teach within that platform. So what we like to do is overlay Garrison et al. In the community of inquiry, where they bring in social presence, the cognitive presence, and the teaching presence to build an environment where students can engage and interact with each other, right? Student-to-student engagement, student-to-content engagement, and student-to-faculty engagement. So when you think about using Zoom or any other web-based conferencing software, you want to think about lights, camera, action first, right? So your presence, your social presence is delivered in a way that your students can actually see you. Right? You don't want to be in what I love to call witness protection if you don't have enough light. So they'll be able to see you and see maybe your facial expressions while you're asking questions and having some interaction. So lights are very important. You can get a very low cost face light that some YouTubers will use on Amazon, or you could just take a lamp that's in your house and make sure that that lighting really shows on your face and shines well. Camera angle is really important. You don't want to be looking up your nose, right, your participants, and you don't want them kind of looking down at the top of your head. Notice that right now I'm looking straight into my camera on my laptop. If you are, however, looking at the screen, like I'm doing right now, it appears that you're looking down. So while you're speaking with your students or doing a presentation or what have you, make sure that you're looking straight into the camera, because that then simulates you actually making eye contact with your participants. Sound is very important. This headset that I have right now isn't a bad quality headset, and I got this off of Amazon. Actually, it was a 2-pack for I think $12. You can get voice canceling microphones and things like that. You want to experiment with different sound and sound quality depending on what you're going to be doing in the online environment. We developed a virtual checklist for the online classroom, right? So thinking about what happens in your virtual class and what you need to do. Get in there early. You might want to check your video sound. Be mindful of your background. In Zoom, as in other web conferencing software, you can change your background. Blurring the background may be a better option than using those standard backgrounds that Zoom first put out, because the blurred backgrounds gives you like a 3D effect rather than that pixelated look that you can sometimes get from virtual backgrounds. Check your camera angle. Make sure you're not people aren't looking up your nose or looking down at the top of your head where you see your camera. And if that camera angle doesn't work for you, try to prop up that camera or move it so that you get a better angle for your participants. Have your slides and your agenda and your documents ready, right? You want to ask everyone when they come in, to mute their microphones, welcome them as they enter, and then begin your session with some housekeeping. And you can just see the rest of the items on this virtual checklist. Some maybe you will use, others maybe you won't, but maybe there would be some things for you to consider. And again, this document can be found on the Padlet that we shared with the conference. Here's where we took a sample lesson plan and kind of filled it in for a virtual class meeting. This is a synchronous meeting that we're talking about. This is not an asynchronous type of engagement. So remember, when you're using your virtual conferencing spaces, this is a time when you can meet synchronously with your students at the same time. And this is a very important space, right? In a very important time. This shouldn't be used for lecture only. This should be used for some active learning and engagement with your students. And that's what they're looking for, right? That's what they want. And that's what's going to help them to learn most of this content. You want to break out your time, making sure that you also leave times for a class break. Remember, being online for a prolonged period of time, or even sitting in the physical classroom for a prolonged period of time, people need some time to maybe digest what they've learned, maybe take a bio break, that kind of thing, right? So look at your plan as you move forward. Classroom management, we call it housekeeping duties. Think about the connectivity, right, that your students are currently having. Remember, cameras on all the time takes up a lot of bandwidth, and some of our students just don't have that, so keep that in mind. Set some ground rules for communication. Do you want them to raise their hands? Do you want them to put questions in the chat? Do you want them to just grab a microphone and talk, right? So it's going to depend on your class and the way that you want that to run. Know that chat box activity in these web conferencing systems can get a little heavy. So depending on how much is going on in the chat, you may want to consider that. You may want to consider maybe having someone else come alongside you to monitor the chat if there's going to be a lot of activity. Tell them how they're going to operate those communication tools in the web conferencing system that you have. Do you have a raised hand? Do you have a break icon? Do you have away from the screen icon in that web conferencing system? In Zoom, we do. In others, you don't, right? And make sure that you provide your learners with your classroom agenda so they know what to expect. Tools that we can use to communicate specifically in Zoom. They have the raise hand, yes, no for real quick polling, ask your faculty to go slower or go faster. Usually go faster is not a problem in my class. It's usually go slower. Thumbs up or thumbs down, clapping. This little icon with the coffee cup means I need a coffee break, and the clock is I'm away from my computer. So I do ask my students to use these tools to communicate to me in a nonverbal way what's going on, right? And sometimes I'll use them for a quick poll as well, or thumbs up, thumbs down, or yes or no. The chat box, again, is extremely important. Remember, we can save the chat box now in Zoom, right? So depending on your Zoom settings and how you set them, you can have your chat box auto-save, and as soon as your Zoom session is concluded, you will get a pop-up window where your chat box will be saved. Keep in mind, however, if you do breakout rooms, those chat box activities are not saved. So if your students are in breakout rooms and they're chatting with one another, they will not, you will not be able to see that activity after the fact. Please think about how you want your students to chat to people in the class. If it's set to chat to everyone, they can talk to each other, but you also want to consider, do you want them to have private chats? So if this were a clickable link, I could click on here and anybody that was in that particular room, I could private chat to them. You may want to disable that in your classroom if you want them just chatting to you and chatting to everyone in general. So consider that in your classes. Remember always to welcome your learners, right? Identify them as they come into your virtual classroom, just like you would in your physical classroom. Hello, good afternoon, that kind of thing. I like putting up a welcome slide with just some reminders about housekeeping too. So I will verbally welcome people as they come into the classroom, but I will also have kind of that like list of things and how we're going to communicate, and maybe some objectives right there on the screen for them as they walk in, right? So think of that welcome slide maybe as your entry into the classroom, which you used to write on the chalkboard and things like that. We have many collaboration tools, right? You can annotate in Zoom, you can draw, you've got a whiteboard, you can spotlight things on your slides, and a whole lot more. We have markup tools in Zoom, and we can annotate and use the whiteboard. Something that you need to consider when you're using Zoom is that if you're going to use videos in Zoom, you can only use Chrome, only Chrome. Chrome is so important for using Zoom with videos. If you do not use Chrome and you use Firefox or Safari, you are going to get a video that you can see and you can hear, but your students will not be able to hear, okay? So consider that when you're using videos in your classroom. There will be a pop-up window when you go to share your application that asks you to share computer sound when you're in Chrome. Make sure you click on that because that is the way that your videos will play. Annotation tools are really cool to use. Annotation tools allows you to draw or stamp on your PowerPoint slides. They can also be leveraged by your students if you turn them on to allow them to communicate using annotation tools. Here's a little icebreaker activity that we do use. Our students, our nursing students, are all within the United States. So we ask them, even though they're dispersed across the country, where are you located? And we ask them to take one of the stampers, and the students have the stampers enabled. So they can tell me, you know, right now I'm in New Jersey, sometimes I'm in Pennsylvania for me, but maybe I have students in Nevada or Idaho. So then they'll start filling in where they're from. And as they put their little icons on the map, you can actually identify those individuals by name. You know, so you can say, oh, Sally, I see you're coming from Wyoming, you know, or from Colorado. How much snow did you get? You know, those kind of things. So those are wonderful for icebreakers. The whiteboard is actually, the virtual whiteboard has gotten a lot better in Zoom. In the virtual whiteboard, you can demonstrate things like mathematical computation for our purposes, or pharmacology and things like that. You can use the whiteboard, and you can open that whiteboard to your users as well. So you can put an equation on your virtual whiteboard and select a student to say, you know, can you go ahead and complete that, or who's comfortable with trying to complete that problem on the whiteboard for us, and they can do that in real time with you. Polling is a wonderful way to get not only the tenor of the class in the moment, but also for planned polling. So you can launch your polling anytime during a Zoom meeting by just clicking on the polling button at the bottom toolbar in Zoom. If you haven't preset your polling, which you can have a maximum of 25 per session, that's quite a lot. I use polling a lot, and I don't use 25 in my sessions. But you can, on the fly, write a polling question. What I do is I have some standard questions that perhaps I may want to ask depending on what my students are saying, how I think the class is going, where I think sticky points are in the content that I'm presenting. And what I'll do is I will pull up this poll and I will copy over from that Word document right into this question. So say my students are having a particularly difficult time with something like cardiac output in heart failure. I may have a question that I want to ask just to figure out where they are and what level they are, and maybe something that they might need later, like after the class, to kind of support that foundational understanding. I can have that preloaded in a Word document and put it in here very quickly. So I can do polling, what I call on the fly, or pre-planned polling as well in Zoom, right? So one of the pre-planned questions that if we were in a Zoom environment, we were going to actually launch for you was polling, what's your favorite color? And then people could, you know, answer the poll, right? If you notice, we only give you 3 colors, and that may be difficult. If your favorite color isn't one of these 3, mine doesn't happen to be on this list. So keep that in mind if you ask a type of icebreaker question like this, and the option that your student wanted to pick wasn't there, right? Breakout rooms are really great opportunities for different types of engagement with your students. So Think, Pair, Share works excellent in breakout rooms, case studies, you know, concept mapping, all type of peer work can happen in those breakout rooms. You can either have your breakout rooms preset where Zoom will sort people evenly into rooms. So say, you know, you want 5 groups of 4, you can have that preset for Zoom, or you can physically move specific individuals into specific rooms. Understand that if you have a very large class, this takes time because you do have to physically move people one at a time. So consider how large your class is if you're thinking about using breakout rooms, and how really important to their knowledge and understanding having specific people in that breakout room is, because it will take a little bit of time to do that individually. Your breakout room button is here at the bottom. You can share documents and links in the chat box. You can share PDFs and Word documents. You just want to remember that you want to click Share Meeting File in this More dropdown, and here's where you can physically save the chat if you've forgotten to set up your Zoom room to automatically save it for you. Okay, thank you very much. Ways to energize your class. Brief videos, we already talked about that. Videos can come from any multiple sources. Publisher content is wonderful. YouTube can be great. You can make your own. Khan Academy has some great videos depending on your content. Guest speakers are amazing, and they're much easier to get now in our virtual environment. So we've had experts in our field and a few book authors and other people come in and guest lecture because they don't have to physically travel anymore. So they really enjoy meeting with our students, even if it's for a short period of time. So please consider that to energize your class. Student presentations work really well in Zoom. Just remember all the tips and tricks that we've presented and others you may want to use. Make sure your students have those so they are just as successful when they present as you are when you do. We use concept mapping that can be used right there in the Zoom environment. You can embed things like Poplet or like Padlet and have them build out the concept maps on Padlet or Poplet in real time. Again, you can just share your screen and watch those things import in real time. Different assessment methods we have used are the polling methods, the chats, yes and no's, reactions, and the whiteboard. You can do just-in-time assessments, or like I said, with the chat box, you can get an understanding of the stickiest point or the most important thing that they found from your session. More uses for Zoom. We use them for office hours, which has been a really well received by our faculty. Proctoring exams early on, we didn't have enough remote proctoring. We did use it for proctoring exams, and our student advisement team has used Zoom in a breakout room type of style, where in that general meeting room, they're able to sort students coming in with student issues that need to speak to advisors into specific rooms and have open advising time, even though our advisors can't be physically on campus. That's worked really well. Remember about Zoom fatigue. Zoom fatigue, all I want to say here is, please do not make your students keep their cameras on the entire time of class. It will strain their brain. Seeing all those pictures and the Brady Bunch kind of look is not good for the brain, and it's not good for learning. How do we combat that? Turn the cameras off, give them breaks, encourage them to stretch and drink and eat. Even though they're on the camera, they need to get up and move around. This is impacting our students in a variety of ways, and many I think that we're going to learn more about in years to come. And that's all I have for everyone today. I really appreciate your time, and thank you all.